Soon after, the United States and Israel launched joint military operations against Iran, targeting thousands of locations across the country with relentless bombing runs and missile strikes. The Iranian regime responded. They effectively shut down the Strait of Hormuz, threatening to attack any ship that attempted to pass from one side to the other. And yeah, they have since followed through on those threats by setting several tankers ablaze and laying mines within the water. They turned a once safe passageway into, well, a veritable death trap. As a result, traffic within the strait has declined by a staggering 95%. Only a small fraction of vessels are now allowed to pass through. Oil prices have subsequently surged around the globe. Entire continents are on the edge of a serious economic crisis, and world leaders are scrambling for a solution. On paper, the answer looks pretty easy. The United States is the most powerful nation on Earth, taking a top spot in the global firepower military strength rankings every single year. Its naval force is second to none. It boasts a staggering 11 aircraft carriers and hundreds of warships, all backed up by thousands of world-leading aircraft and near-endless supplies of missiles and bombs. A force of such immense size and strength should be able to conquer entire nations with relative ease. So, why can't the United States just take over the Strait of Hormuz? How hard could it be to control a simple waterway that's a mere 21 miles wide at its narrowest point? Well, for America and its allies, it's much harder than it sounds, and the answer is hidden in the geography. Between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman is the Strait of Hormuz. It connects the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean beyond that. Iran is situated to its north, with Oman and the United Arab Emirates to the south. You know, this stretch of water may not look all that important on a map, but sometimes, the smallest locations hold the greatest importance. It's actually one of the most significant passageways on the planet, holding enormous influence over the global economy. That's because it is literally the only way for oil to leave the Persian Gulf by sea, and this is honestly one of the most oil-rich regions on Earth. Many of the countries here rank among the world's largest oil producers, including 5 of the top 10: Saudi Arabia, Iran, the UAE, Iraq, and Kuwait. Combined, these nations produce close to 30 million barrels of oil every single day. While some of that oil travels to its destinations via pipelines, a large percentage of it has to travel by sea. It must traverse the Strait of Hormuz to reach the many countries that depend on it. A staggering 20% of the world's oil, as well as 20% of its liquefied natural gas, flows through this single waterway each year. Those destination nations can be found all over the world. Millions of barrels head straight to Asia to feed the world's largest manufacturing hubs. In Europe, it powers the electrical grids of major nations. And in Africa, entire countries rely almost exclusively on Gulf state oil, just to keep their vehicles running. Even parts of the world that don't directly buy and use oil from the Persian Gulf still feel the effects when the Strait of Hormuz stops functioning as it should. Because, you know, when 20% of the world's oil supply gets cut off, the price of oil all over the world goes up. That creates a snowball effect with a huge range of knock-on consequences for the costs of numerous other goods. When oil gets more expensive, everything becomes more expensive and, honestly, almost everyone suffers. This is why the Strait of Hormuz is so incredibly significant. It's more than a simple waterway, it's a vital artery in the global economy. Some argue that the most obvious solution is to send in the US Navy to take control. They could remove the mines, deter further Iranian aggression, and escort tankers safely across the strait. It seems entirely plausible. The US Navy boasts almost a dozen aircraft carrier strike groups. It possesses some of the finest warships and destroyers ever constructed with a military budget larger than dozens of other nations combined. It is stronger than Iran in every measurable metric. We have capabilities that no other nation on Earth has. If Iran does anything to stop the flow of oil within the Strait of Hormuz, they will be hit by the United States of America 20 times harder. Hagues and other US officials boast about the enormous impact of their recent strikes on Iran. Billions of dollars worth of American bombs and missiles reportedly laid waste to the country's military infrastructure, leaving the Iranian regime with almost no navy or air force to speak of. It seems completely feasible that the US could move its world-leading warships or state-of-the-art submarines into the waters surrounding the Strait of Hormuz. They could establish control and provide safe passage for the tankers that desperately need to travel through it. Headlines and news reports, they constantly focus on the fact that the Strait of Hormuz is extremely narrow. It's just a mere 21 miles wide at some points, but really the actual shipping lanes passing through it are much, much tighter. There are only two main lanes that these vast oil tankers are legally allowed to follow to get in and out of the strait. One takes them from the Gulf of Oman into the Persian Gulf, and another leads back out the other way. These lanes are only about 2 miles wide, with another 2-mile buffer gap separating them from each other, and, honestly, ships are heavily channeled through these paths. These strict routes are, without a doubt, of paramount importance for controlling traffic in such a tight space. They prevent potentially catastrophic incidents like, say, two massive tankers violently colliding. When the Strait of Hormuz is working as it should, tankers and cargo ships follow these highly predictable, rigid paths in and out of the area. And, these are not agile, fast-moving military ships. Oil tankers are, colossal. The largest units are technically classified as ultra-large crude carriers. They typically measure more than 1,000 feet in length. These giants are capable of carrying millions of barrels of oil at a time. Their enormous size and weight make them extremely slow and, honestly, pretty clunky. They often travel at speeds as low as 12 miles an hour when traversing restricted spaces like the Strait of Hormuz. So, they are gigantic, unarmored vessels moving at snail-like speeds, trapped along clearly defined pathways. That makes them incredibly easy targets for any enemy force planning to ambush them, especially an enemy force possessing many miles of elevated coastline looking right out over those exact predictable pathways. You'd expect such a vital artery to be under the strict control of an international authority, right? An authority that carefully controls the narrow shipping lanes, oversees traffic, and ensures the strait remains a place of peace and safety. Well, that is simply not the case. From a legal perspective, the strait falls under international law. It's covered by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. This states that all ships and aircraft enjoy the right of transit passage, which shall not be impeded, and that states bordering straits shall not hamper transit passage. The convention theoretically allows ships from any nation to travel through this waterway without being disrupted or interfered with. The problem is that even though the passageway is ostensibly protected by international law, the waters on either side of it are owned and controlled by Iran and Oman. That gives those countries a huge amount of leverage and influence over the strait's operations, especially Iran. They possess dozens of miles of coastal areas and several small islands dotted along the northern edge of the strait. These vantage points look directly out over the waters, offering clear, unobstructed views of the dozens of defenseless oil tankers traversing the area each day. Even though Iran doesn't officially own the strait, it is in the absolute best possible position to control it. And in recent weeks, Iran has taken full devastating advantage of that fact. The US and Israel may have decimated Iran's air defenses and missile launch systems. They have not wiped out Iran's ability to defend itself entirely. Reports show that Tehran still stockpiles missiles, drones, artillery, and other weapons. They could use these to conduct devastating strikes on vessels attempting to sail through the Strait of Hormuz. And this leads to the next big issue with military intervention. It would be almost impossible for the US, even with advanced warships, to truly guarantee protection for the vessels using the strait. If Iran wanted to attack those ships, it could use a wide range of short-range weapons. Rockets, short-range missiles, and mobile artillery systems stationed along the coastal areas could do colossal damage. These are not the long-range munitions Iran has used to strike US bases across the Persian Gulf. Those weapons take several minutes or even hours to travel hundreds of miles. That delay matters. It gives the defending force ample time to identify the coming threat. They can evacuate bases or launch interceptor missiles to limit the damage. Any targets of Iran's short-range weapons do not have that luxury. When launched from such close distances, these weapons cross the water in a matter of seconds. They strike their targets in the blink of an eye. This leaves the crew with almost zero time to figure out what is happening, let alone react to it. As retired U.S. Army Colonel David D. Roas notes, you have to detect, identify, track, and then intercept a missile. And it goes very, very fast. Even if American warships were actively escorting a tanker across the strait, they would violently struggle to counteract an unexpected salvo of Iranian missiles or artillery fire erupting from the coast. Now multiply this nightmare by a 100. The US wouldn't just have a handful of tankers to defend. As the world's most important oil trade choke point, the Strait of Hormuz gets intensely busy. Over 100 vessels pass through it every single day. These are not military vessels, equipped with air defenses, surveillance systems, turrets and chain guns. They are simple transport ships designed for one thing: to transport oil or other goods from one place to another. They have zero means of defending themselves and rely on a couple dozen unarmed crew members on board. Thousands of lives are put at risk every day as these vast vessels attempt to get from one side of the strait to the other. Having to protect that many people, escort that many slow-moving tankers, and deal with that many simultaneous threats would be a Herculean undertaking. It would stretch the United States and any answering allies to their breaking point. And that's without even mentioning one of Iran's most efficient and cost-effective weapons: drones. Recent years have seen Iran emerge as one of the top military drone-producing nations on Earth. Its Shahed drones saw extensive use by Russia in the Russia-Ukraine war. These drones are remarkably cheap to make. A typical Shahed 136 is valued at roughly $20,000 to $50,000 per unit. That is a mere fraction of the cost of the million-dollar interceptor missiles, often used by the US Navy to take them out. This brutal economic math means Iran can mass reduce them in vast quantities. They launch massive swarms solely to saturate enemy air defenses and deal serious damage. While technical specifications vary across models, many of these drones carry sizable warheads, some in excess of 100 pounds, traveling at speeds around 115 mm/s. But the most concerning thing about them is their range. Iran's drones can travel an estimated 1,555 miles. They could theoretically be launched from anywhere inside Iran's borders and be used to target civilian ships in the Strait of Hormuz. US defenders could take out large numbers of these drones, but it only takes a couple of them slipping through the net to deal colossal damage. Hundreds of millions of dollars of oil could go up in flames. Entire unarmored tankers could be sent sinking down to the depths of the strait. There's an even deadlier threat, though. US officials frequently boast how America's airstrikes have left Iran without almost any naval force to speak of. But in reality, Tehran still commands lethal water-based assets. Those include mine-laying ships, small fast attack boats, many submarines, and even maritime kamikaze drones. All of these systems could be used to cause chaos in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran could use swarms of small boats to overwhelm a ship's physical defense or blow holes directly in the sides of slow-moving oil tankers. Even if these tankers had US warships escorting them or aircraft carrier groups patrolling the area, they still wouldn't be totally assured of making it through the strait without being violently attacked. Iran doesn't need to defeat the US in a one-on-one pound-for-pound conflict. It doesn't need an enormous army, thousands of complex missile launchers, vast warships, or other big bold assets. It only needs to make the strait a dangerous and risky place to travel through. It can do that with a relatively cheap basic array of tools that it still has in abundance. Artillery and anti-ship missiles fired from nearby coastal positions with almost zero warning. Radars tracking vessels moving through tight shipping lanes. Mobile units and mass drone swarms just waiting to be unleashed. Much of the terrain along Iran's southern coast is intensely rugged and mountainous. The Iranian military knows the area intimately. With home field advantage on their side, mobile ground units take up strategic positions hidden deep among the mountains and valleys. They launch cheap munitions before quickly moving to new locations. Even with jets and helicopters in the air, the US Air Force struggles to pinpoint these guerrilla teams, especially while contending with simultaneous threats from air and sea. At that point, it doesn't actually matter how much muscle the US flexes. Tankers still won't want to travel through the strait. They'll remain exposed to drones on the horizon, artillery hiding behind the coastal cliffs, or deadly mines hidden beneath the water's surface. The companies that own and operate these boats will not want to take any risk of losing them. And the insurance firms that usually cover those companies won't be willing to do so, which leads to the ultimate paradox of the strait. Technically speaking, it's not mines, missiles, or physical threats keeping oil tankers stuck on one side of the strait or the other. It's insurance, or to be more exact, the lack of it. Soon after the war began, all of the big insurance companies that historically provided coverage for tankers rapidly scaled down their offerings. Many simply refuse to cover any vessel that intends to traverse the Strait of Hormuz. This is exactly why any idea of the US taking over the strait is a catastrophic catch-22. The goal of taking over the strait is to keep it open and allow oil to flow through, but the act of taking it over inevitably forces it to shut down. The very presence of American military vessels in that part of the world causes extreme commercial jeopardy. There would always be at least some sliver of threat deterring insurance companies from offering the necessary coverage. Without insurance, the giant shipping companies will not sail, leaving only one apocalyptic option. The only way to truly secure the strait would be for the US to completely wipe out Iran's ability to threaten it. It would have to wipe out the majority of its missile systems, and then, it must systematically destroy every single one of the rest. It would have to eliminate the entire drone army. It must level all the production plants where those drones are made. It requires disarming millions of underwater mines and completely neutralizing all naval bases. It means eliminating every single military asset that could be used to attack the Strait of Hormuz. It requires severing the complex supply lines, allowing Iran's allies like Russia to provide additional munitions in the future. The US would have to completely nullify the military capacities of a country of more than 90 million people, a deeply entrenched regime that has been preparing for a conflict of exactly this kind for several decades. The US has been dominant in its war with Iran, taking out thousands of targets, but there is a huge difference between damaging a large part of a country's military and completely annihilating its entire ability to defend itself. Even for the world's most powerful military, a mission like this demands a superhuman effort. It wouldn't be a 4-week operation. It wouldn't take a couple of months. It would take years of sustained, brutal combat and unfathomable amounts of money. During all that time, the global economy would severely suffer. Oil prices would violently rise, triggering widespread inflation in many markets. Everyday people would be forced to pay exorbitant amounts for everything from the gas in their cars to their utility bills, groceries, and basic goods. An operation of this devastating size and scale involves US lives being put on the line day in and day out. Some have already been lost. More would inevitably follow. Even if the US and Israel successfully took out large amounts of Iranian soldiers and military targets, relatively mild US losses would be too much to bear for large parts of the population and the politicians elected to represent them. This leads directly to rising domestic dissent and severe political disruption back home on American soil. It fractures the US's relationships with its allies in Europe and elsewhere. Its desperate military actions would continue to keep the strait in a massive stranglehold. It worsens the global crisis with every passing day affecting nations, continents, and billions of innocent people. This is the terrifying paradox of the Strait of Hormuz. The more forcefully a superpower tries to control it, the less stable it actually becomes. In this part of the world, true stability isn't about total military dominance. It's about restraint. It's about deterrence. It is about maintaining a remarkably delicate balance in a very small, fragile, yet extraordinarily influential location, a place that by its very nature cannot ever be completely controlled. Which forces an entirely new question: if the greatest military on Earth can't secure this tiny waterway, why don't shipping companies just go around it? The answer is a catastrophic, geographical, and economic nightmare. And you can see exactly why we can't just bypass the Strait of Hormuz by clicking the video on your screen, right?